Hello and welcome back to the next part. My name is Mayasmata. Welcome back to the channel. It's August 14. So, like I was saying before, I think Japan is a great example of where the future is for the world, Europe, and America, and especially. While they face quite isolated problems that most countries don't face due to uh, large swaths of homogenization, since they're one people and they don't have other groups in their area. But their problems are still rather similar to, an unusual facsimile with first world problems. When life is too good, it creates ruin and excesses. And through those excesses, we create vices for ourselves that destroy and tear at our social fabric in the world. And I'm going to relate this back later into the bigger picture of, the culture war in America and Europe, and how does that relate from a place that's facing only a monoculture. But as I said before, Japan, I think, is the future. So let's start back in the roaring 60s, 70s, and 80s. Throughout those years, Japan was facing radical development, radical change. Its industries started as mere copycats of the American presence in electronics and industry, but soon, before you knew it, they had their own industry. They started their own businesses, started competing with American products, and eventually overtook them. But as we get closer to the 80s and 90s, things started to slow down due to the fact that there wasn't any more land to expand, and families stunting their growth. Something to keep in mind is in Japan it has a very tight, very strong social structure in which you're allowed to operate. While some things are permissible, many things are not. So how do we get to the story of the Hikikomori? From, a bustling economy, a wonderful place, a clean, thriving place. How do we get there? Well, as these things started to grow and grow, to become more successful in one's career, to take care of your family and to be a good provider, usually as a single male for the family, bringing in income. At this time, women were not considered to work, and that their place was seen mostly at home. But in the modern age, this is now changing. But during this time, we stopped seeing as many industrial workers, and we saw less hard labor jobs, and more, just like America and many other places that are first world countries, commercial started exploding as they got bigger and bigger, thus giving birth to something called the salaryman. The salaryman is kind of a dirty word, if you will, for the in America we would call it the breadwinner, who brings home the bacon, who earns the money for the family. And everything's going fine as the years go on, but as people wanted to excel in their job and move further along and further, they had to commit more time and energy to get ahead. If you wanted to be in the boss's best favor, if you wanted to get the next job promotion, you needed to work overtime. And when one person does that, everyone wants to do it. As more and more people started working overtime, salarymen would not come home to their families later and later and later and later. And there's an unspoken agreement in a company that you don't leave until everyone else leaves. And because of these unspoken rules, it's very hard to break them without being shamed or even fired. So these fathers would work and work and work until 6 p.m., 7 p.m., 8, 9, 10. This slowly took a gradual toll on the family, starting to pull at the social fabric of Japan. As this happened, more and more families started becoming more distant and more angry at the loved ones in their family. The children started to resent them. Mothers, wives started to resent them. Again, pulling more threads from the social fabric. So, with many people facing these kinds of problems, the salarymen that went to work every day, they slowly found themselves falling into a hole where they weren't wanted at home and they needed to work to feed a family that didn't care about them. Well, Japan, for the meantime, found a short-term solution that they kind of made a long-term solution. So they'd be staying overnight at sometimes and not coming home till the weekend. And when they didn't go home, they would go out to celebrate again with their workmates and their bosses to try to appease them, to move ahead. And so oftentimes these businesses would take their entire office staff to something called a nami hodai. Nami hodai is kind of a all-you-can-eat or all-you-can-drink buffet that's open usually 24 hours a day, but most of the time the business time is around 5 p.m. till 12 p.m. or 12 a.m., sorry. And these nami hodais would take care of the businessmen, they'd feed them, they'd drink them, and they would share their families and their stress problems with each other, and they found a very strong kinship. But of course, as this continued to happen, drunk salarymen would come home and people would look at them kind of in disgrace for walking home drunk, slurred, and ultimately knowing that they don't want to go home. Again, tearing at the social fabric of society. So why would the Japanese businessmen try so hard even when their family doesn't love them? They'd rather be home. Everything wants them to stay with the family, but they want to show how hard they're trying for their business and for everyone. Well, that comes because of a Japanese principle known as Kaizen. Kaizen means forever change or improvement, I guess you would say in English, to continuously improve and make better. And the Japanese strongly believed in what they call a personal Kaizen. So how could you make your life better, stronger, and just become the best at whatever it is you're doing? And if you became a master in your field, it was something to praise and something that was greatly honored. So these businessmen or salarymen were usually the Kaizen of their field. Oftentimes, these were kids that growing up during or right after World War II, they had a new, fresh look on life. They weren't under the imperial system, and they could stretch as far as they could, and the old Japanese way were still with them. Oftentimes, salarymen were seen as the modern samurai for a long time. And so this principle of constant improvement of Kaizen, the kids, or when they were a kid, the salarymen, they were told, what do you want to do with your life? And, oftentimes they want to be the best or most successful at whatever it is they set their mind to. And most of the families were open and willing to whatever their hearts desired. They were rather open and liberal about it. But they had one rule: whatever it is you set your heart on, you cannot leave it or abandon it. What you choose for your life as a kid, you must follow through to the end of your dying day. So many of these businessmen followed the practice of Kaizen, and many of them stuck with it because they found value in their honor of doing what they do. And even though they were looked down upon later on, they knew that they were very honorable and prestigious in what they did. But because of this, it had a toll on the society, again, tearing at the social fabric. And we still see salarymen today in Japan, but due to automation, many jobs are becoming redundant and closed. And because of trade deals that were changed in 1995 in Japan, their economy stagnated. And they face something called a stagflation, where you have rapid inflation and stagnation of the economy, causing your money to quickly devalue and for your jobs to be a jobless recovery. So what's happening at home? At home, the Japanese mother would take care of their children, and the mothers did the best they could to raise the child that they best could fit into the world. But due to their heavy, more patriarchal society that men were seemed more valuable than women, they put a lot of emphasis on their child. And many times the mother would never correct the child unless it was to dishonor the family name or to dishonor the family in some way. Only then would the mother take action to stop the child, but most of the time the children were free to do what they want. But that wasn't really a problem because most Japanese children are heavily attached to their mothers. And because of that strong bond, it slowly became a detriment as they grew older. As the kids would not be pushed to pursue goals, to pursue interests, the mothers would not push them to become more than they could. Because oftentimes the mothers in their position felt that it was their job to take care of the kids, and if the kid leaves, I lose my place in life, I lose my meaning, and if I lose my meaning to my husband, I'm dishonorable. And so many mothers didn't want to face that, so they never encouraged their child to try hard. And that's understandable in the position that they were in, but ultimately it causes for dead ends and dead means. And many of these children that felt socially isolated and didn't want to try and didn't have any natural aptitude to want to push, they didn't push, and the parents didn't push back. And oftentimes the father was still at work or never came home and honestly didn't know that their kid wasn't trying or wasn't going to school. Thus born the Hikikomori. As life became increasingly isolated for these kids, for men and women both, we see cases where many of them would be staying home, aimless, listless, and the parents would oftentimes become regretful and hateful of the child. And because of this, the kid pushed back in a form of protest by just refusing to go to school, and the problem became worse and worse. And we're still in this situation now. And Japan's Hikikomori population is actually unknown because they're unable to take proper census numbers. And as the salarymen get older and older in retirement, there's no one there to replace them. So they're running into problems of a large elderly growth problem. And hikikomori can be man or woman. It doesn't have to be one or the other. But what makes the hikikomori special? What makes them different from, say, just an ordinary slacker? Well, a slacker would probably just be somebody that's aimless, looking to just couch surf and then still enjoy life without having to pay for responsibility. The hikikomori oftentimes do take heavy responsibility in what they do. Matter of fact, they are quite active in the things they love, but they are not responsible and active in the things they need to. Oftentimes, hikikomoris have been found to have immense collections of art that they've done, or massive fan fictions, or you name it. They're still working, but they're not working for a goal that will benefit them in the long run. Many hikikomoris still maintain the Japanese principle of kaizen, but they've taken kaizen to a dead-end place where they've become the perfectionist in things like model building, collecting, painting, many fields that oftentimes don't pay or have anything to help them with future life and prospects. Many of them refusing to become salarymen because they see what's happened to their fathers and their brothers. Due to the way that the Japanese family is structured, even though it's heavily stratified, it still won't fall on its own weight, meaning even though the hikikomori child is not working, not trying to do anything, the parents don't reject them and instead indulge them in their behaviors. And because of this, the problem is getting worse and worse, and the Japanese government has actually reached out to try to pay for interest in getting people to talk to each other, but without much luck, because there's many psychological problems that are stopping hikikomori from changing. You can look this up. There's been many psychological papers done and research that isolation is painful in its initial stages, but isolation, particularly social isolation, can actually become very addictive. And many of these people are afraid to change their life and don't have any external sources encouraging them to try something new or change something. In the modern days of delivering food and the internet, you no longer have to leave your house, which further encourages hikikomori to remain in their sedentary lifestyle. Now, how does this relate to places like America, or how does this relate to places in other countries? In America, we don't have hikikomoris per se, but in America we do have problems with slacktivism, or something like people being on Twitter all day, on Facebook all day, and mimicking similar things hikikomoris are without the kaizen principle. An example would be like, people use the rude word of SJW, or social justice warrior, in America. These people often share very similar traits to the hikikomori, except for a more external social kind, because in America we don't have the social strata that stops us from changing what we want and what we want to do and what we want to be. So a great example of how a hikikomori is very similar to a social justice warrior would be their immense passion for something that is not lucrative. A social justice warrior would be very passionate about making sure people aren't offended, or preserving a group, or wanting to protect a unprotected class. Whether it's through schooling or personal research, they find oppressed groups that may or may not be oppressed. That's not the conversation. And they find causes that they want to uphold, because many of the causes in America and the first world have already been solved. And so, like the book Fight Club or the movie Fight Club, it is a generation without a true struggle. So they have to create one. Many of these people, are not ill-intentioned. A lot of them have good intentions, but the problem is they're not very aware or reactive of their results. They mostly come from a good intentioned place, but a lot of times they don't understand the outcomes of what they're trying to do. They haven't fully thought out the plan of what it means to do what they want. It sounds all good to say we want everything to be equal, but what does that look like? Are we equal on the smallest level? What if somebody is dying of cancer? Is that fair? Should we make everyone die of cancer if that person's dying of cancer? If one person didn't get a discount and another person did, should we ban discounts? One person has a little bit more money. Should we ban people that don't have the same money as us? And that's the problem, is these thoughts are not completed. It's only an initial pass. A more disruptive thinker, Gavin McInnes, is very popular for saying, let's think this out. And he's absolutely right in that statement. We need to really think out a new law or position we want to take. And as somebody that's been on both sides of the aisle, of very liberal and very conservative, and seen everything in between, and I don't have animus or animosity against any of them. I truly understand where they're coming from. But it's a lot like being in a dark room with a flashlight. You can only aim the flashlight in one direction, and you only see what's going on in that one place, and you don't know what's happening in the other corner. You can hear sounds or see things on different sides of the room, and yell at people, hey, do you see what's in my flashlight? Come over here, look at this. And they could tell you the same thing. So a lot of it is just a lack of understanding from each other. And why has it become so heated? And why has it become so vitriolic? It's because, what do you call it? A removal of personal face on the issues. No one is talking to a person anymore about the issues. They're talking online, they're talking on Twitter, they're reading one words, and it's saying, hate all men, or, death to feminism. And the problem is people are reading this and taking this one clip to represent thousands of people, even the person that writes it. You would find that most of these people are generally calm, normal people, but they leave one hateful comment and then they're like, oh, I feel better, but I'm not going to do anything else. And that's all people are going to know you for, is that one comment online. And so people get attacked, they get sapped. Some people lose their jobs. Some people get jobs because of just these one word conversations on Twitter saying hate, like my tribe, your tribe, us, them. We're not really seeing that happen in Japan per se, and the reason it's not happening in Japan is mostly because it's homogenous, and also because of a saying that they have in Japan. Many children, when they're young, are taught a lesson. They're taught a phrase, don't cause waves. And what don't cause waves means is do not cause problems for other people in the world or in society, because they will cause problems for you. And because of this, things like political, controversial, economic, environmental, many issues are avoided to avoid offense. And even when you do offend people, they won't tell you that they're offended because they want to keep it quiet so that you don't retaliate against them or you don't cause any problems. Um, let's see what else. I think that's good enough for today. Let's see, next time I want to jump into a different subject because we've talked about how Japan is currently facing all the problems we are, but through a different lens. I guess next time I can talk about my journey through the left and what I was like maybe 10, 15 years ago as a social justice warrior myself. And we'll learn about that next time. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys next time. Please leave a comment. Maybe we can start a podcast. We can just have a conversation. Let me know. Have a good one. Goodbye.